Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Aurora.
And I'm your bad bitch, Avery. Woo!
And this week, we are discussing Series 8, Episode 1, Deep Breath by Stephen Moffat, the first official story featuring the 12th Doctor. It's also an extra long episode. It's 76 minutes long. I think it's one of the longest, normal episodes of Doctor Who that wasn't, a special.
This kind of was given the special treatment, because I remember, we remember watching this at a movie theater.
It got a big cinematic release, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
A world tour as well.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, it is your kind of standard regeneration episode, loopiness, difficulty adjusting, that sort of thing. I rewatching this. I've liked this episode for a while, but I think rewatching it, I was kind of struck by how it did feel kind of messier than I remember.
Yeah, I definitely it wasn't as tight as I remembered it. I remembered it being pretty good, or I remembered it being really good. And I would say it was more just pretty good. That's very unsubstantive, but I think I remember it having a bit tighter script than I remember, and I think as soon as I saw the runtime, I realized oh, this is actually not as tight a story as I remembered it being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's several moments where the pacing sort of lags, and a scene could either be abbreviated or just not there. But yeah, it's a messy bitch of an episode, but I love her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very fair. So yeah, we start off, and it is another Victorian era Vastrogenian Strax episode. And so there's a dinosaur in the Thames that basically kind of hacks up the TARDIS, in which 12 and Clara kind of stumble out of. I will say, I think for me, one thing that I think kind of is a negative for me on this episode is the way that 12's post-regeneration loopiness is mostly portrayed. I think there are some scenes where it does work, but mostly it feels kind of off and he's still writing for 11.
Yeah, I definitely get that vibe. It's just kind of tonally weird. I feel he hasn't...
Yeah.
He's writing 11 being resentful about being a grumpy old man and not as much writing 12 yet, which is kind of fair because that basically is what's happening. But yeah, I think it's still in a tonally weird place.
Yeah, but right. But 11 had his regeneration weirdness, but it was still identifiably 11 and a new character. And well, I guess 10 spent most of his time in a coma, but the point is that, and I mean, I guess there's precedent for both in classic. I think it was handled better in 11th Hour, where it was very clearly it didn't feel like he was writing for Tennant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it works because Peter Capaldi is able to sell it, but that doesn't say much. That's something that's probably we're going to say continuously as we go on is, yeah, Peter Capaldi is able to sell whatever.
Yeah. I was sort of indifferent to it. I think there are a few moments where it definitely feels more like 11 shtick than what 12 will be developed into. It's probably one of the few like gripes I'll make about like Series 8 is that there is sort of an uncertainty of like, well, we want this Doctor to be darker, but we don't want him to be like an actual like asshole, so we have to do some goofy bits. Um, Personally, it's mostly forgettable to slightly funny for me, and I can just headcanon it away as like he's still like sort of transitioning. Funny how we use that word, but it's
Yeah.
he's still transitioning fully into like being 12, and I don't think he quite gets there. At least like the initial version of 12, I don't think he gets there until the very end of this episode. So like it's, I don't know, it's weird, but it's passable for us.
Well, since you've said both the words transition and passable, I have to bring in my take for this episode, which is that it is very blatantly a trans
Wait.
allegory.
I was gonna hold off on that until a bit later.
I was going to as well,
I think
but
most of my
I just got set up.
most of my comments with it, fair enough. Most of my comments with that have to do with the end of the episode. So I'm gonna wait until we get there.
Put a
The
pin
one
in it.
thing, the one like I, for example, I think what I was saying is like the scene in the bedroom, I think works. I think that's one that works and manages to get kind of a way of the like writing for 11 feeling. Like that's an example of, I think, a case where like the post regeneration weirdness works, but I think a lot of the time it's with dialogue that feels like it's written for Matt Smith.
Okay, but yeah, I like most of that scene. What I don't like is when she like knocks him out, when Vastra psychically knocks him out, and there's a big goofy ass sound effect.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say I didn't get to that part in the thing yet.
For no
like,
fucking
I
reason.
will
And then
I will say, I think as much as Vastra and Jenny are all right, this episode specifically really feels like it highlights the whole, yes, these are a lesbian couple that is being written by a 40-year-old cis white straight man.
It's so awkward.
Especially
it feels a little fetishy in parts.
the fucking part where it's at the very end of that scene where it's just like, oh, so people are monkeys now, and it's just like, no, like people are apes, men are monkeys.
Yeah, that line was
Something,
so
and I was
like,
just like, that is such a fucking 2013 Tumblrite feminism moment.
It's proto turf shit.
Basically, yeah.
it's so cringy. I mean, I feel like they wrote that line because they know it would play well with Tumblr, with like 2014 Tumblr.
Oh, don't get... I'm going to be real. There's definitely some parts in this episode that feels like it is directly grabbing the Doctor Who tag on Tumblr and shaking it by the lapels and going, do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get it?
Oh god, yeah. There is definitely a lot of I feel like a lot of Jenny and Madame Vastra in this episode is very much just like, fuck you, Tumblr, like me.
Yeah. And it I think there are some places where that doesn't work as well, and I think is a detriment to the episode, but you know, whatever. So yeah. Like, so here's the thing. I guess this so we move on to like starting the plot here of Clara not really being sure about the Doctor. I think like sort of organizing my thoughts about the episode now. I think I really think that it works up until it doesn't. And we'll get to where I specifically think it's like, oh nope, that you've kind of lost me now.
I'm curious to see where that point is for you, because that was a contention for us as well. Especially because like that whole initial scene from where like it's Vastra and her veil, it honestly it works more of a comment to like Vastra's character than I think Clara's, because the whole culmination goes into like, oh, I'm not as shallow as you think, kind of, but then it goes on, and and that goes into question. So it's just, again, like an interesting scene and concept. I think it works by itself, but just what happens later, I'm just like, well, that contradicts that. So
yeah, well, I think you can actually just read it as like Clara overestimating herself almost. I definitely get what you're saying. Like, I feel like structurally it's a little weird, but I don't think it's totally like implausible that she's sort of insisting like, I can do this, but then she still sort of struggles with it for a bit up until the end of the episode. I don't know. I do get what you mean though. Like, of all the scenes, I definitely think, well, like I think it's an interesting scene, but I think it is a little overhammed a bit and maybe a little overplayed. Yeah. I think a lot of where this episode is the weakest is like the first half, pretty much, I would say.
I think it's trying to...
Yeah, because it's kind of got some weird pacing.
Absolutely, because I feel like they just kind of like have Clara fuck around with them a bit too much. Yeah. Like the one scene I would say like you just don't even need, like you can just cut that and save a bunch of minutes, is just the scene with her and Strax in the kitchen. Like, what was the point of that?
God, yes.
You could have just like had her find the article or whatever, like as its own thing for like 20 seconds, but instead there's like 5 minutes of them in the kitchen, and it's like this it's not a big deal. Like, I wasn't watching it being like, oh god, fuck, this episode is going so slow. But like in retrospect, looking at how long the episode was, I feel like you could cut the scene and it would not matter.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, I'd say maybe this is unpopular, but I feel like the whole sequence of the Doctor waking up again, doodling on the floor is fine, and deciding to go out the window instead of the door is fine, because again, that's like character establishment. But once it gets to like, oh, we need him to like fall down a tree and, you know, get on a horse and make it a whole joke and a thing, and then linger on the guy whose horse just left him so that Strax can drive by him. Again, it's no single moment that has like bad pacing breaks this episode, but it all adds up to be like, well, that was nice, but not a lot of it needed to be there. And when I look back at this episode, I forget a lot of these parts, because all of the best stuff is like in the transition into the third act, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, it's like I'm looking through this again, and it's kind of like the real it is another case where the alien plot feels like it's more the B plot.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's an episode where they're kind of really balanced, I would say. I don't know if you can really divide them into A and B plot easily, because I feel like they're very closely aligned, is what I would say. And they kind of get like equal runtime. I would say definitely the stuff with the Doctor is a bit weaker though. Just at least all the stuff in the early part of the episode, just like all of Clara's stuff, is a bit weaker written.
Yeah, there's kind of a reverse, I don't know, importance or interest effect going on, where like at the beginning I'm at least more attached to the mystery of like what's going on with the spontaneous combustion and like the clock people, and then as the episode goes on, I care more about the Doctor and less about the Promised Land bullshit, because at least the resolution for that for me on memory wasn't the best. So it's like, okay, well, and again, that sort of contributes to the weird feeling this episode has, where it's not bad, it's just a little bit of an odd child, which I guess for the beginning of the 12th Doctor, that's really appropriate if you think about it.
An odd child, like the timeless child.
Fuck you.
Fucking Lamau.
Take a drink.
Chibnall bad, pounds a shot.
Anyway,
Couldn't make it one episode.
Yeah, and it's like I'm looking through this, and there's a lot of scenes that are okay, but they're just kind of, and I mean, I'm not gonna complain about this, but they are like slow character scenes that don't really add as much to the actual episode, which, you know, that's fine. I appreciate that in the pacing. There's just definitely, I think, a couple places where it's like, you know, you could probably like have trimmed it a little bit.
Yeah, I think if the dialogue was a bit snappier and it wasn't like basically rehashing the point of like, I don't think I know who he is, but maybe I do because we found this other thing, and it's just like that keeps being the beat that they go with, which is a good beat to have, but not for every single character scene you have.
Yeah, I feel like definitely a lot of the earlier stuff could have been cut out. Like, I think there's easily about like 10 to 15 minutes of the early stuff you could cut out, and then maybe with just like a few shorter scenes, you could get it down to about an hour, and I think it would be a much tighter episode. Because I feel like a lot of the stuff that's like integrated into the automaton plot works for what the early stuff is going for and establishing their developing relationship, without having to just like devote an entire scene to like, oh, woe is me, I don't know him anymore, he's a stranger, just like on its own. I feel like it was integrated better into like the actual monster plot of the week, and could have basically stood with just that and maybe a couple other scenes and would have been just, or like much better. That would be my main critique.
I will defend the scene with the tramp to the death, not just because it's the late Elizabeth Sladen's husband, but because I don't know, I just think it's really fun, and as well as being fun, it's kind of like the first moment we get of the Doctor starting to reflect on who his new self is, which will of course become a major theme throughout this season and arguably next season too. Arguably his whole run. Let's just go with that. So yeah, I don't know. Could you conceivably just cut that scene and it not affect like the structure of the episode? Yeah, but I think it's one of those few moments that adds enough color, enough like extra stuff that I'm willing to give it a pass.
Yeah. So yeah, Clara and the Doctor are reunited through a newspaper ad, which they eventually realize neither of the other put in, which is a nice little nod to the Missy arc. And yeah, I think this up to the last 5 minutes is where the episode really flourishes. Definitely.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yes.
Yeah, I think like you really get to it's definite, like you definitely get the sense that he doesn't entirely figure himself out until the final scene with the half-faced man, but I think this whole this sequence on is definitely he's starting to settle into it, and you definitely get a hint at where he's at for series 8, where he basically the door shuts and he's on the between him and Clara, and he's basically well, no sense in them getting both of us, and just fucking leaves.
Yeah.
Yep. Great moment, great set, great atmosphere. This is probably the first time the episode actually slows down and takes a minute, and it's for something that progresses the character, the narrative, the theme, everything. And I hate to say it like this, but just this one scene with 12 and Clara reminded me that in comparison to the chemistry that 11 and Clara have, where it's just basically hey, we're two traditionally Hollywood attractive people talking to each other and we get along. This compared to that, it's so much more depth, so much more believability in the type of relationship and just how they would interact as characters, especially in the heat of the moment. I don't know. It's just, I'm glad we're here, guys. I really am.
Yeah. I mean, see, I remember watching, basically this whole sequence, very vividly, because I feel I remember each moment being a real gasp reveal, one that really got me. The bit in the restaurant when there's why, or look around, really look at them, nobody is eating. I remember that moment. I was yo, fuck. It's such a good bit because it's so, I feel they really did the effects in this episode really well, because I think it is CG, and they really use that really well to give them that really mechanical, awkward looking feel. It comes across so creepy. It's so good.
Especially the sound design.
Yes.
Yeah, every time they move with their stiff movements, it's a good effect.
Yeah. No, the way that they the actual actors really kind of visibly move like clockwork, clockwork. It's it even though it's kind of it is the same deal as the clockwork robots from Girl in the Fireplace, it feels more impressive here because they're not, you can see their faces, they're not in the masks, they look like human beings. So yeah.
Yeah, just the effects with all the faces and stuff too is really good. It's just so terrifying. It's so fucking creepy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And just the way they, I don't know, did they have just the main robot, was that a CGI and then a voiceover? Because however they did it really convincingly in a way that I was
no, I think it's definitely, I imagine it's probably they did CGI touch up on the half of the face because that it doesn't look if the whole thing is CGI, that is way higher budget CGI than I think they had access to right
all right
then.
So it's probably a motion cap rig and then also CGI projected onto it. Anyways, however they did it, it's really convincing and very impressive, and just I struggle to even call him a character, but that part of the episode is just, it's really gives it gives the inhuman antagonist an inhuman face for the audience to just play off of in a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to look up how they did him, because
it looks like they did CGI it. Yeah, it is just CGI. He wore a prosthetic during filming, but it is basically CGI. I imagine that they just it's just a mask that they put on.
Yeah. Looks like they had a prop of the face for the close-ups where you can see the gears turning as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, regardless, good effect. It's pretty seamless.
Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, there's the thing that I think really shines about this episode's runtime is that it means that some of the moments, like the moment where Clara is effectively being interrogated by the half-face man, they really have time to just roll for a bit. Like they have time to kind of sit in the scene and soak it in for a bit first.
Yeah, that scene is definitely a really good one. I think that the thing with like her flashback is a little awkward, just like story-wise, but I can't really think of a better way to have worked that in. Maybe they could have also just like cut it. Mm-hmm. I feel like much wouldn't have been lost if she just like did that without prompting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little confused by that decision to like have that little flashback.
Yeah, I it's another thing that we totally forgot happened. Yeah, I guess it's I forget her name. We see that student who is in Kill the Moon.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know. You could argue it sets that up, in which case fuck you. I don't want that set up.
What a lame setup.
Yeah. But yeah, this is sort of the I don't know, the difficulty with Clara as a character in giving her like this different backstory so far into her character is that like this new version is definitely better, or maybe not better, but like more fleshed out and like interesting. Yet it's like it wasn't always there, so there's definitely a sense of like we're playing a bit of catch up with that, and it's something again that I think like is one of the few things that Series 8 is saddled with that isn't that good at all. But no, like Jenna Louise Coleman, that scene of hers, I don't think she ever had a bad scene in Series 7, mostly just like good to forgettable ones, but this cemented her as like, okay, she's a companion. She's
it really feels like a moment where she clicks.
Yeah.
Like definitely. I think it is a definite moment where it's like, oh, this is something different. Like, oh yeah, there we go. Like it really, it is a goddamn strong start to Series 8 and kind of its reset of what's going on with Clara and the Doctor.
It's also, if you take a look at where Clara's arc ends up going, this is sort of the first time she role plays a bit of like what the Doctor would do and how he would try to take control of the situation. It isn't quite at the like level where her ego makes her think she can do the exact same thing, because she's obviously like terrified out of her fucking dress. Pants.
That being said, they've already started making the control freak and the other jokes.
Yeah, that's good. I forgot those started here. But I guess it wouldn't have made much sense for 11 to call her that.
Yeah, he's too nice.
Yeah, so no, a brilliant scene.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a really good payoff like, because like this is what I mean about the stuff between the two of them being integrated into this plot. Like that moment is like on its own is such a good bit of like, if you're still the Doctor, like you will be here, and then he is, and it's like, aw.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So let me see here. Yeah, I do like I also I will say I think the way that they handle the uh fucking the newspaper ad of like consistently being like, aha, I know who did this, and it's like, no, actually, nope, you were off. Psych.
I forget. I hate being wrong in public. Everybody forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the half-faced man dips on them, and he fucking says, "Your friend is intelligent. He'll know better than to follow me." And it literally like cuts. It fucking like hard cuts to the Doctor fucking like holding on to the
bottom of the seat elevator. Yeah.
Yeah, the bottom of the seat elevator. It's like, yeah.
It's such a good moment. There's definitely like a few really hammy Moffat lines in this episode that are like very goofy in a way I appreciate. Like when they ask him like, how could the escape pods be working? Like this ship is like millions of years old, and he's like, it's been repaired, and they're like, how? And then he says, with you, and we don't know what that means yet. And it's just like, it's such a good fucking line.
Oh no, that also feels like an RTD type. That's the same thing of like fucking John Lumick from beyond the grave.
It's such a hammy line. I love it. And then just like, the concept of the skin balloon is so disgusting. All I can think in that scene.
I forgot about the skin balloon. I remembered the balloon, but I forgot that it was a skin balloon specifically.
All I can think with the skin balloon is just like the It's Always Sunny scene with Dennis going, think of the smell, you bitch, you haven't thought of the smell.
It smell, you bitch. Yeah. Yeah, also, actually, the skin thing reminded me, I just want to take a quick step back to the bit where the Doctor reveals himself in the like underground like facility because he is wearing a face mask that if you like pause, like that is actually like a latex face mask of Matt Smith's face.
Oh god.
I know authors who are subtle and they are all cowards.
Yeah. So, and then you get that final scene, where that tense scene where he talks with the half-faced man that I think is really just like, yep, this is it. The 12th Doctor's here. It's probably, other than the final scene, which I'm going to be real, I will talk about how I kind of don't like the circumstances revolving around the final scene, but I will still admit that that's probably like Capaldi's best acted scene in the episode. But yeah, and they even there's a short shout out to like, hey, this seems familiar, to the girl in the fireplace.
Oh, he does that a bunch.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was like an intentional, like he wanted to tie these two things together, or he started writing this, realized he kind of already did it, and said, fuck it, there's more ships in the Navy, right? I can do this.
Yeah.
I remember when
It doesn't bother me.
I remember when it was
yeah.
announced that it was going to be the same like things from The Girl in the Fireplace, and all the like Doctor Who fan people online were like, soy face, that's so cool, callbacks. Myself included, of course.
I mean, I don't know. I think
it worked.
works.
No, it totally does. It totally does.
Of...
I'm just amused by it because, I'm calling myself out here for being a fan kid who is like, so cool, expanded universe lore.
And of course, Chad 12 brings it up, but doesn't remember how it's connected.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was going to say about how I think like the use of continuity is very tasteful here. It's not like shoving it in your face. It's like, this seems familiar, but like it doesn't really like you don't need to know it. You don't need to know that The Girl in the Fireplace exists. It's a very tasteful use of continuity. So yeah. Badoo. I also like that it leaves it very ambiguous as to whether the half-face man jumped or the doctor
Yes, that is, I was going to mention that. It's definitely my favorite thing about how it's resolved. And just like the discussion leading up to it, and I'll get into this a bit more later, but just like the parallels between them, because he's talking about programming in both of their contexts. Because he's like, one of us is lying about our programming, and I think we both know who it is. And that's such a good line, and it's made even better by the fact that we don't get to know who did it.
Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah, because like your immediate instinct is to say like, well, of course the robot jumped because the doctor wouldn't push him. But then you kind of stop and go, but
unless
this is a new doctor and we don't know anything about him.
And at this point in his character, even though we know later on that he becomes a much more, more jovial, friendly person, like you still don't know for sure. Like you could totally. It's not just like it's up enough to interpretation that you could make a totally valid point in either direction. And in the end, it doesn't really matter.
For sure. The Ship of Theseus sort of speech that the doctor gives really helps like further muddy the waters, I think, because the whole point of like, oh, we know the doctor's code has been like he doesn't kill, but he's just fought a war for 2,000 years and is now for like 1,000 years, and he's a completely different person. And as he points out to the Clockwork Man, it's like, it might, self-destruction might be against your original programming, but what the fuck does that even matter anymore? You probably don't even remember where you got your face. And such a great camera trick that you can see both of them looking into their reflection as the other one looks on. Is just such fucking great stuff. Plus the fact that the first time we hear any real, like, emotion from the Clockwork Man is after the doctor asks, like, of course, you realize one of us must be lying about our basic programming, and he sort of shudders out a yes, and I was just like, oh, that's so good. Anyways, yeah. Messy bitch of an episode.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting how it does kind of present through like the ending and how it essentially makes it like makes it so oh, brain moment. Because he meets Missy in the Promised Land, it effectively makes it so that it basically states that he kind of becomes human in like, or is human enough to be able to go to this fake promised land.
To have a consciousness to upload, yeah.
Yeah.
It's also like we never really figure out how long or how Missy has been choosing people to go to this Time Lord Matrix Promised Land thing. Spoiler alert. But it's like, the way we've kind of thought about it traditionally is that she's specifically picking people that have interacted with the Doctor. At least that's what we see in the episode. So you could also take the angle that, like, the only reason this Clockwork Man had quote-unquote salvation at all is because the Doctor was there.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah. And then it moves on to the after that it kind of resolves. Clara ends up back with the Doctor, and they have this scene. So here's my comment on this end scene is that I think the whole thing of this Doctor not like the 12 wanting Clara to see him as 12 and not as 11 as who he is now and not who he was is good, but I think it kind of the phone call with 11 kind of shoots itself in the foot. Because I think it's a stronger message, and I think if we also talk about the fact that the talk about the whole thing where it's the kind of a trans allegory, I think having the call from 11, it feels like it goes a little bit too far into the Moffat trying to take Tumblr by the lapel and be like, listen, we know that he's old and not quote unquote attractive anymore. It'll be fine. I think it leans into that a little bit too much.
I can see that.
Maybe.
For me, the problem I have is that, like, we have the scene with Vastra and Clara before she takes off with 12. It's like, I don't know if I know who the Doctor is anymore. I feel like if there was a cleaner line of, like, in the beginning she's struggling but optimistic, and then he leaves her behind and probably, like, causes her to, like, experience a very traumatic event. I feel like if that was highlighted more and being like herself thinking like 11 never would have done this to me, you know, like this, I don't know who you are anymore. I feel like if there was a better through line for that, that it would make more sense where she's coming from. It doesn't help that when 12 meets up with her, he says a line, which to this day I've never gotten around why they put this in there, where he's just like, Clara, I'm not your boyfriend. And she says, I never thought you were. And then he says, I didn't say it was your mistake. And I'm sorry. When the fuck did 11 ever seriously consider himself that attached to, like, aside from the weird, horny, like, off moments, when was that ever a thing for him?
I think I don't think I can see it, because it's especially because I think you can kind of read 11, like, he has this detachment, but there is, yeah, I don't know. That didn't bother me. that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might...
And I think it was fairly internally consistent with how 11 was portrayed in the last season.
Yeah, I just think it, like, for you to make sense of that, it's like you really have to pull into the subtext to draw that out, and the fact that you need to do that for something that is made text, that is made actual dialogue, as like a character beat that 12 no longer feels or wants to act a certain way that he doesn't feel or that he felt was expected of him. It was just a little weird for me. Again, it's not like, it doesn't sink the episode, but yeah, it's just sort of contributes to the whole weird feeling around the final scene. But like once the phone call is over, then I think it's great, because this whole thing of like, I didn't need to listen in. That was me calling. You don't see me. You don't have any idea how like frustrating that is. Like, please just look into my eyes. Please just see me. Like that. Of course, it's Peter Capaldi. He's gonna nail that out of the fucking park. Take a drink.
Yeah.
But yeah, just it's set up weird. And that's kind of the whole problem going from Series 7 to Series 8, because a lot of this stuff is great. It's just in its growing pains right now, because they have to, like, do a weird transition. There's that word again. Haha.
Yeah, so I guess I'll jump in now. I don't mind the phone call. I think it's fine. I don't have, like, any particularly strong feelings either way on it. But I do agree that the scene with Capaldi's speech at the end is very good. And just, this episode is a trans allegory. It is.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
The way I would say that is just like both parts of it are very much about this idea of changing yourself. Because you have the automatons who are obviously, progressively replacing all their parts and such, and there's some very obvious transcoding there, especially the fact that, he makes it into heaven suggests that he did become human. Yeah. And then just obviously with the Doctor, he literally changed bodies, and that's already like pretty transcoded on its own. Like the Doctor, Time Lords in general, Regeneration is just a lot of transcoding, but just like this particular episode is the most trans Regeneration episode, just because of Clara's reaction and the types of things they say around it are so specifically transcoded, I would say. Like, Clara's whole thing is just like, I can't really see him as the same person, and I feel like that plays a lot into this concept of like, oh no, dead name is dead. And yeah. And just, it's really interesting to watch that play out, and just like, part of why I really like the the veil scene is like this idea of the veil is the judgment, and I'm not doing it for them. Like, I'm not doing this for, like, I'm not putting that on that veil for someone. The veil is a judgment. And how that goes into
that's
like,
sort of,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's very much just like, I very trans. Like your veil being a judgment on others for not being able to like handle who you actually are. And then just like putting it on Clara, like, are you going to be able to handle this? Like, are you really his friend? Can you actually handle this? It's very trans.
Yeah.
And just like all of that is of course reinforced by the fact that the episode ends with the arrival of trans icon Missy. Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. The veil part, I didn't quite realize why it resonated with me at the time, but yeah, it's really obvious. Especially whenever I go somewhere where it's just like, okay, I'm boy moding to this place, that's sort of the mindset I go into it with. And it's just like, I have to do this for you assholes, basically. But yeah, Avery makes a good point in, especially like with the amount of intimacy like platonic intimacy going on between like how close Clara and the Doctor have gotten. Her having met more than like 2 versions of him, which is like pretty rare for a new companion, for a new Who companion, and sort of that idea of like there are so many people who think like, oh, my girlfriend or my boyfriend, my partner is transitioning, and I'm going to be completely fine with that, but they sort of overestimate what that means,
Yeah.
and not because they're like bad people, it's just like genuinely a lot, and sometimes that understandable like confusion and anxiety manifests in like really bad and toxic ways, but other times it just like takes time to get through it. And what I like about
Yeah.
this is that Clara is sort of, I mean, she decides to stay with 12 almost, sort of out of obligation to 11, but it takes her the rest of this series to really like decide like, no, I'm going to stay with you. Like, I'm really going to stay with you, which
Yeah.
I think is a good choice, because we talked about this all the way back in the RTD era. Clara of the Capaldi series is basically Rose done better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Anyways, so yeah, that's about what I have to say on this episode.
Yeah, I think I'm wrapped up too.
All right. In that case, I think it's time to move on to ratings. Yeah, I think it's a little bit messier than I remember, but it's still pretty decent. It's all right. I enjoy it. Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid like A minus.
Yeah, this episode is a messy bitch. I keep going back to that phrase, but it really is. There's a bunch of pacing problems, certain like weird choices in dialogue. I think a lot of it comes from like the Paternoster area, and I guess I understand if you look at this episode as also a send off to them and their place in the Doctor's life, but I don't think anybody was really asking for that. Also, just because nobody mentioned it, the contrivance they make up for Vastra and Jenny to kiss is fucking stupid.
Yeah, that felt that kind of was another like thing of like, okay, cis straight guy, I see you writing the lesbian couple. Yeah, huh?
I mean, it's not like the most shameless thing I've ever seen done for fan service. That would probably be Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain, where it's just like, no, she's skimpy because she breathes through her skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just be horny, Kojima. It's okay.
Yeah.
But anyways, aside from that, it's a really it's not the strongest start to an era, but it's definitely given me the most potential to be excited about. To like looking forward. So that's nice. Yeah. Strong 7 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a mess of an episode, like I will admit, just like straight up. It's there's a lot in the first half that I think could have been cut, and I think it would have been much better paced for it. But it's also like a fucking it's a classic at this point, I would say. Like, I have very fond memories of this episode, and it's just it's good, and just like all of the bits in the later part of the episode are just like totally knockout moments, just like great bits. Yeah, I really love this episode, even if it's a total mess. And I would say it's like a 7.25 out of 10. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So next week we will be discussing Into the Dalek. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, such as early access to episodes, the ability to listen into episodes being recorded live, and potentially even the ability to guest star upon an episode of your choosing. I'm Geoff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I am literally transcoded and Italian. You can follow us on at Mice of Femmes on the Twitter.com.
I'm gay and filling my penis with a large amount of Nuka-Cola.
And we will see you all next week.